scriptures, and Paul even encourages to be single if you can. But he encourages them also, if that's not your gift, to be single, it is very better to marry than to burn, as he puts it. So marriage is created for us. And like Kurt pointed out, it's like it knocks off our rough edges. Sure, our key relationship is with the Lord Jesus Christ. But in marriage, it will be tried and tested right there in the public theater sometimes. You know, another observation, it was instituted as an integral part of creation prior to the fall of man. Adam and Eve had roles, responsibilities, and commandments about tending the garden. He had a job. And these roles and responsibilities were given prior to children, prior to homeschooling. So your marriage is the foundational part of your homeschooling. It precedes it. Your relationship with your husbands and wives precedes it. And therefore, it's preeminent. It is the most important relationship. Marriage in the New Covenant.
Okay.
Ephesians 5, Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, and that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. This really says that us men are challenged to love our wives. We can't love our wives too much. It says right here, it's an impossibility so far. It's impossible that we love our wives too much. Just a couple of observations. He identifies marriage, the marriage relationship, as a mystery, and it is symbolized in our relationships with our husbands and wives. That's profound, isn't it? It's incredible. It talks about the husband giving himself for his wife in the way that Christ gives himself for his church, for sanctification. And then this is the most extreme thing, I think, in the whole passage. We're to love our wives as our own bodies. Men love their own bodies pretty good, especially this bearded guy. But men love their own bodies. We all do. That's why we like to eat junk food sometimes, because we know it's going to be good for us, but it's not. So we have these gym memberships, and we do all these things, take care of ourselves. We watch how we dress. Now, you women are probably laughing at some of this because your husbands probably have underwear older than some of your children. But this is what's taught here. This is the encouragement. He talks about wives being in subjection to their husbands. And let me say, the way this plays out naturally is you pray with and talk to your wife or husband to make decisions, especially major ones. Like the toothpaste, should it have a lid on or not, or toilet paper, should it be back or front. It's interesting, Zan and I've talked a lot about this. You know, this has rarely come up in our marriage because we're a team. You know, we're pulling in the same direction. So we're constantly talking about decisions together. And but scripturally, if there's a tie, somebody has to make the deciding vote. And the Apostle Paul encourages that here to be the husband. The thing I glean from all this stuff is that the quality of the marriage ultimately depends on the husband. Our culture has things backwards. There are probably more women in churches than there are men. I'll never forget my mother-in-law, Zan's mother-in-law, were talking about this. She was a Baptist. I went to a Presbyterian church. We didn't have women elders, and the Baptist church was debating whether to have women deacons or not. And I loved her approach. She said, good night. If they let women start doing that, men won't do nothing. And if you think about it, but underneath that is the temptation that men have that's laid out in the Garden of Eden. When God came and confronted them with their sin, meat and apple, what did Adam do? He didn't step in front between God and Eve. He kind of stepped to the side and said, the woman you gave me, she gave to me, and I ate. So they constantly are blaming. And then she says, the serpent. Nobody's going back to God's word at all. They're all giving excuses. So then it's easy for us to give in to the temptation to let our wives do certain things. So if she comes to you really needing help or encouragement or decision making on the part of your kids' education, homeschooling, dive in and help out, because really that's your role. This model of leadership, I think, is what men need to employ in homes, in business, in the world, especially in the church. Jesus was asked many times who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. One time, by two of the disciples' mothers. Can you imagine? Jesus sitting there with here the disciples, and John and James' mother comes up and says, hey, which one of my sons can sit at your right hand? And it's recorded in the Bible. They can't duck it. It's right there. So Jesus answered. You see, I've redlined all these words. That the greatest in the kingdom will be whoever humbles himself. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and so on. So that is the model. Yes. Thank you. We are to love our wives, as it says in 1 Peter, to live with them in an understanding way. That means that you men should absolutely understand all about your wives. Raise your hand if you're there. I'm always learning things about Zan. Every year that goes by, I learn new things. And I'm encouraged here to really study her. Find out what those triggers are. You know, find out what it is that really makes her fear or worry. What issues, concerns does she have? How can I live with her in a more understanding way? We're encouraged to study to understand her and know her love languages. You know, Gary Chapman wrote a book years ago, and you're quoted all the time. The 5 love languages can be acts of service or gifts for various things, or just time with someone. My real love language was that time. That's why when we plan some Father's Day or birthday or something like that, that's what I always want. I just want the whole family together. It doesn't matter what we do. It'd just be great for all of us to be together. Zan's more words of affirmation, which is kind of bad, because I'm not so great at that sometimes. You know, I'll get in my own mind and have my own bad attitudes and stuff and don't praise her enough. So what is your wife's love language? And how can you better show her love? And your wives, as homeschool moms, have unique pressures. Pressures unlike your friends that kids every morning get on the yellow school bus have. The unique pressure she has really is fear that she's screwing her kids up. Sometimes Zan would wake me up in the middle of the night, and she would have been awake worried about that. And I understand that, because a mother, more than anybody else, pours her life into her
when we started
kids.
homeschooling, I'll give you the real skinny on the story. I would wake up every morning at 2 o'clock because I would hear everything that everybody was saying to me about homeschooling and how I was going to ruin my kids. And I think, you're right. I mean, I'm really going to ruin my kids. And they were asking me, what about physics? I'm thinking they're 6. You know, what about the prom? What about PE? All these things. And they were, it was like an alarm clock was set. And Joe was my best friend, so I knew he wanted to have all these conversations with me at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'd wake him up, and he finally looked at me and he said, Zan, honey, Jesus is always awake. He taught me every morning at 2 o'clock in the morning. He did twice. For a few minutes.
But fear is real among homeschool moms. I mean, all they have to do is just see their friend. I remember when the boys were real little, we'd go over have a play date with them, and their kids would have better toys than our kids had. We'd come back feeling, oh man, our kids are going to be hopeless. Anyway, guys, really encourage your wives. And she's got all these things to do on her plate. Let me give you some practical advice. The most romantic words of a homeschool dad is to ask how you can help. Do the dishes. Do the grocery shopping. That used to be my job. I did a lot of dishes and I did a lot of grocery shopping.
You like to eat more than I did.
Yes. If you do the shopping, you can do stuff. So if you don't like eating weeds all the time.
He does do those things.
You can also eat
Except
in
the,
grocery store.
what's,
I love
well,
the
I gotta
places
sit.
with cans.
Yeah.
You know, it's legal to just fill it up, and as you're shopping, eat.
He does a lot.
Okay? You leave about that
What's
much.
lacking is the word.
So, do the grocery shopping. Continue to date your wife. Continue to go out and arrange stuff yourself. That would be amazing. Your wife would appreciate that much.
Joe left out one.
Uh-oh.
The one that says, let me teach a subject. So I'm going to tell them that you teach in Latin.
Awesome.
Okay, so both of our boys have had a Spanish tutor, and they could speak Spanish fairly fluently. So of course, when Lizzie comes along 7 years later, she wants to take French. Then she decides she wants to take Latin. Well, Joe did have Latin in high school and Greek in college. He thought he might be going into the ministry at some point. So he says, I'll teach Lizzie Latin. And we got this program from the University of Michigan. It was all cassette tapes, but it was self-paced. It was really actually an excellent Latin program. And Lizzie was very self-motivated. She was our last one at home. And so Joe says, I'll teach you Latin, Lizzie. And so they get out the tapes and they figure out the testing and the schedule and how it's all going to work. Lizzie did do that. And told her dad, and so Joe was traveling a lot, so she got to the end of the first unit, she calls him, hey Dad, do you want me to go ahead and take the test? He said, yeah, Lizzie, take the test. So she calls him back and says, when will you be home? You can grade my test. He said, Lizzie, I trust you. Go get the teacher's manual and grade your test. So she gets to the end of the first semester. Hey Dad, I just took the exam. You want to grade it? No, honey, that's okay. I totally trust you. Go ahead, you do it. So they have 2 years, not 1 year, 2 years of Latin like that, where Lizzie is her own proctor, her own teacher. So she goes to college, and she's a really bright girl, went on a lot of college scholarships. So she gets to college, she takes the Latin placement exam. She doesn't know that it tests you way beyond your knowledge. They're trying to figure out where to place you. She gets out of that test. She's so close to her dad. All of our kids adore Joe. So she gets out of this exam and she finds me and she says, she's crying. She never cried in public. I'm so mad at Dad. I'm going to kill him when I see him. Do you know how much Latin I didn't know on that test? Do you know how much Latin he taught me? 0. She was, if one of my kids had been that mad at me, I just would have gone off somewhere and cried and died. Well, it turns out, I don't know, I can't remember how many semesters of Latin she placed out of. But the funny thing was, because she did this tape series, she spoke flawless Latin. She said, isn't that a great gift, speaking a dead language? And her professor would always say, Lizzie, I would love to meet your Latin teacher. And she would call Joe and say, hey, I got your guest lecture spot today, Dad. You want to come up? And so Joe told her, Lizzie, this was the plan all along. I wanted you to own your own education. So
You cannot give an education, you can only take it.
So Todd Wilson always says, don't discourage your husband when he starts doing a little thing. Just let him go and let him do it. Don't criticize him. I did that. I guess it worked. It worked. Okay.
Day in language. That's awesome. So, if your husband wants to teach a subject, let him. Let me see if there's anything else here. I think I mentioned all those things. And as we get older, it's almost like God knows how wicked a man's heart can be. And that as a man gets older, he can be tempted. And there's this encouragement time and time again. In Malachi it says, has not the Lord made them one, flesh and spirit through his? And why one? Because he was seeking godly offspring. So guard yourself in your spirit, and do not break faith with the wife of your youth.
So we want to talk to you a little bit about your vision lining up with your kids. So I have to say, in our family, I would be more the Kirk, and Joe would be more the very calm one. Because Joe never loses his temper, he never gets rattled, he never gets angry. He's just always like this. And I'm the one fighting with the kids, and you know, Lizzie came downstairs one day, she says, I'm so mad at Dad, but he will not fight with me. Are you in the mood for a good fight? So, you know, he's just kind and patient and gentle and all those things. And I keep asking God if he gets credit for that just because he was born that way. But one of the things I want to finish up as we talk about pulling in the same direction is about how important it is for you to study and know your kids, just like Joe was talking about studying and knowing your wife. Because the marriage is the foundation, and I just want to say this to you. I have way too many single friends in the homeschooling movement whose husbands have left. And one of my closest friends, her husband was a pastor and left her with 4 children, the youngest of which was a baby. And so she single-handedly provided for those kids, worked, homeschooled them, they're grown now. I mean, it's really an amazing story. So the Lord is a father to the fatherless and a husband to the husbandless. So I don't want anybody to perceive this as not caring for the single women and the single dads in our lives, because Joe and I have a real heart for that. But it's really important for those of us who still have our marriages to really focus on them and make them strong and make them good. Because you begin with a marriage and you end with a marriage. When our kids walked out the door, it was the deepest grief when my last child graduated from high school. And I had a job, I had a life, we had so many things going on. I wept every day, uncontrollably, for hours. Joe put me on a crying management program. He said, all right, today, let's set the timer and see if you can stop at 30 minutes, do a few things, get up off the floor, but it's true. And so I just want to encourage you that the time with your kids is really short. You've got like this bell curve, this 18-year time to really input your life, but then your marriage is going to be left. And I remember when I got over Lizzie going to college, I looked at Joe and I said, you know, it's a good thing we really like each other. I mean, we've always loved each other, but it's a good thing we really like each other. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things we did with our kids, and one of the biggest lessons I learned, really, in terms of knowing and studying our kids. I was teaching at a co-op. I was teaching public speaking to 10 to 15-year-old boys. Both of my sons had just left for college, and I was really just missing my guy time. So I had these boys, no girls, totally uninhibited in this class. And I brought in all these National Geographic maps that were way outdated, somebody had given me. But we used them as a speaking prompt, you know, the people groups on the front and the maps on the back, and give me 3 minutes just off the top of your head. So at the end of that public speaking class, I'm trying to fold up these maps. They're like 5 feet by 7 feet, and I have no spatial relationship skills. And the maps are turning about this thick, and the other kids' faces are pressed on the glass, waiting to get into our little classroom. And so Shane comes up to me. He's 13. He said, Miss Tyler, give me those maps. I can fold them up. So he folds them up in about 2 minutes flat, 20 maps. And I said, Shane, honey, how did you do that? He rolls his eyes at me so sweetly. He said, Miss Tyler, you got to fold them the way they're bent. Well, I was doing a study by Chuck Swindoll at the time on Proverbs 22:6, teaching youth about the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Swindoll says, we might paraphrase the verse to read, adapt the training of your children so that it is in keeping with their individual gifts or bents, the God-given characteristics built into them at birth. When maturity comes, they will not leave the training they have received. And so we really have to start studying our kids to know the way that God has bent them. Because if you have a son who is an artist and you want him to be a lawyer or an engineer, and you start trying to bend them in the wrong direction, you're going to end up with those maps that I had that were out of control. You want harmony in your home? Study your kids. Understand their learning styles. Understand how God bent them. Understand what motivates them and their strengths and their weaknesses. And you'll be amazed when you're going with the current in that direction, how much it will help your family life. And I would say at the bottom of it all has to be an unconditional love. Now it's interesting because our kids are so different. Our oldest son was always active, always pushing the envelope, bouncing a ball while he did his work, moving, and he was followed by a lot of people who loved him and a lot of trouble. And so Joe was so great at handling him, and I grew up with all girls, so this was just like a shock to my whole system. But we loved them. And I can remember South Carolina is much hotter than Idaho in the summertime. It can get up to 105 degrees, and it is very humid. So Joe was a college athlete. And so when soccer came out, and soccer was just starting in the South, they just needed some guy to coach who knew how to handle a ball. And it turns out you really don't even handle the ball. And so Joe was the soccer coach for the boys, and they were 5 and 7. So he had been out on the soccer field all day in the blistering heat. The next morning we're in church. My 5-year-old son John leans over to me and whispers like only a kid can, "Mommy, what's wrong with Daddy?" And I look over, elder Joe, sound asleep. Passed out. I said, John, I don't think anything's wrong with him, honey. Why? He said, "Mom, he is deep in prayer about something." He loved his dad so much, he knew he would never be asleep in church. And it really reminds me of the verse that love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. So when our kids, when I as a wife know that Joe is totally committed to me, I have never in my life not trusted him. All the years of travel, not trusting him was I'd get a bit mad at him about other stuff, but that just never entered my mind. Our kids need to know our commitment to them is like that, no matter what they do or how they are or the problems they have, we love them. And so I would encourage you to do that. And then with homeschooling, I would say because you're dealing with school, one of the most important things you can do is figure out how they learn. And I know you've heard me talk a lot about Ty. My second son, who's the one who's the attorney, would just say, if you give me my books, I can go learn what I need to learn if you'll just stay out of my way. That was kind of his attitude. And then when I started homeschooling John and Ty in high school, y'all have to cut me some grace here because people weren't homeschooling much in high school then, and I'm trying to figure it out on my own. So I looked at John, who was in the 7th grade, and I said, "John, you are now in the 9th grade, honey." And so Ty and John did high school together, and I never apologized to John for just skipping the 7th and 8th grade with him, because I really don't want to put that thought in his mind. Oh yeah, you really did do that to me, didn't you? So I'm teaching Ty and John in the 9th grade, all the high school stuff. Lizzie's 6, but she just turned 6, and I'm trying to redshirt her. I'm trying to talk her into starting a year late. Mom, no, you're gonna have to figure out how to teach me reading. Well, she didn't tell me she could already read. So I ordered this curriculum that was very easy to follow. Every day you do this, you do this. Wasn't the greatest curriculum, but I knew we would get through the 1st grade. So about the 2nd week, I'm struggling with high school. Lizzie says, "Mom, if you give me the teacher's manual, I'll finish the 1st grade." So she would get the teacher's manual and read the directions and then fill out her little exercises. I said, "Lizzie, if you can read the teacher's manual, you probably don't need to do the exercises in the 1st grade book." She said, "I am finishing the 1st grade." So Ty's the one, I had this curriculum in kindergarten because of our archaic law. It would read every morning, put your feet on the floor, put your hands on the desk, and look the teacher in the eye. We never had a school day like that. And every day we didn't have a school day like that, I felt guiltier and guiltier and guiltier. So one morning I wake up and I'm in the kids, I'm the drill sergeant, I have a whistle, downstairs, real school today, meet me in the schoolroom at 5. So I give Ty the rules. Feet on the floor, look me in the eye, don't play with your cars, don't bounce the ball, don't get up every 5 minutes. And so we had a miserable day, needless to say. Ty couldn't say a word. He never engaged with me once, and he was talking all the time normally. John was in tears because his brother was upset. It was terrible. So I told the Lord, I don't know what this is about, but we can't ever have a day like this again. So we go the next day, and it's about a week later. I go to this little boutique to buy a birthday present for one of the kids' friends. They can play with the Rio train set we can't afford. And I'm reading a book in their book nook, and it's called Growing Up Learning. And it's by this man who has his PhD in education. And it says, kids learn in 3 ways. Now, this is the 80s. This is news to everybody, including me. Auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. And woe be unto the child who's auditory kinesthetic, because moving and talking aren't acceptable in a classroom. But if you can get them out of the classroom, as miserable as they'll be in school, they'll be great successes in life. And so I'm thinking, oh man, this is Ty, ding, ding, ding. He described a graduate student he was working with. She said she has to spend so much mental energy, this is the first time I understood it, being still and being quiet, that she had no mental bandwidth left to do her schoolwork. And so I call that day Independence Day in our homeschool. If you have a child who learns like that, I have a friend who's a doctor who's ADHD. He said, if we could write the test, the people with the learning disabilities would be those boring kids who sit in their chair and read all day long. And they would get the bad scores on the test scores. And but if you have a child like that, make sure you're embracing who they are as people and teaching who they are as people. Otherwise, your family life is going to be miserable. You can have a great marriage, and you're putting your kid in a box God never meant for him to be in. And you can adapt all kinds of curriculum to every kind of learning style. And so I would just encourage you to do that. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I want to talk to you about spiritual gifts for just a minute. There are all kinds of things you can study about your kids on your own. You can study their personality. You can study their strengths and their weaknesses, but really begin to look at their spiritual gifts. I know when we started homeschooling, all of a sudden I started noticing my kids' spiritual gifts. Ty had a gift of evangelism. John had a gift of exhortation and understanding, even as a 4-year-old. Ty can remember one of the first weeks we homeschooled, he's outside riding his bike, which was odd. I hardly let him outside during the daytime. And I called him in, and he didn't come. So I went out there and said, look, Ty, this homeschooling thing isn't going to work if you don't start listening to me. He said, Mom, you know how we were praying that we could share Jesus with the neighbors? And I said, yeah. And he said, that was just yesterday. This little boy, I've never seen him before. What if I never see him again? I thought I better tell him about Jesus, just in case. And I knew he would understand. And so I watched, and Joe watches. And Joe was so good at nourishing their spiritual gifts and letting Ty share the gospel in season and out of season, in dangerous places, and at work and everywhere else. And then John was 4. He and my sister are at Stone Mountain in Georgia, and they're hiking with Ty, and Ty sees this footprint in the ground, and he says, John, look at that. That footprint's so big, it must be God. And John says to him, Ty, God is a spirit and hath not a body like man. And he was 4. So John is the exhorter, the elder in church. Ty is the evangelist and the one with mercy. And Lizzie is discerning like her dad and just has this heart of faith and prayer. And so we just want to, homeschooling is so great because you can not only focus on the learning styles, but the spiritual gifting, because our churches today need kids who are growing up, who know their gifts. When Lizzie moved to LA and she went to a Bible study in this church, this big church, this woman looked at her and said, Lizzie, did you grow up in the faith? And Lizzie said, yes, I did. And she said, well, honey, we need you. Because depending on where you live, and it's like this even in the Southern Bible Belt now, we just need believers who know what they believe and why. So we're going to wrap up now, and but we thank you for being here. I'm sorry Joe had laryngitis, but I needed to steal the mic from him just a little bit. And we will see you for our last session, and this is how to raise kids to be intentional Christians in a whatever, I say a hostile world now. So I hope you'll join us for the last session, and thank you so much.
Okay, you guys have lunch till 1:30. Let's do a quick book giveaway. Raise your hand if you have 10 kids. 9. Oh, 10? We have 10? Yes, you get a book.
Ooh, boy. I figured out where I want to go. What? Old country sausage place with grilled fish. It's got deli. Yeah, so they have like sandwiches. Text me. Okay, yeah.
Well, are you joining us?
Work? I hope so. Oh,